go towards a positive narrative. What I'm going to try and do this evening is share with you why I do what it is that I do, how I do it, and what it is. So why, what, and the how of narrative coaching from my perspective. And it is very much, I suppose, my perspective. It's interesting when we start to read books around coaching and look at the different ideas that people have around coaching, that we start to see what we thought were our own ideas written down by somebody else. And so some of these ideas aren't mine, but I think they were. I think they travelled through time, stole my ideas, then wrote them down, and then presented them to everybody else. So I'm going to talk about why I do it, what it is that I do, and how I do it. And hopefully share with you a way of working and a way that I like to approach how I do coaching. But this isn't the only way that I do coaching, but hopefully through the stories that we'll tell this evening, you'll get an understanding of why it is that I do what I do. So let's start off at the beginning, I suppose. Stories and me, the ideas of what I like about stories. And I suppose one of the things I love about stories is that we can be anybody in a story. When we create a story, we create a narrative, we can be anybody in that space. And I remember when I was about, it was a long time ago. I was about 11, and I'd gone to secondary school. And at secondary school, we had a drama class. And I walked through the doors, and the teacher at the time was just sat in the corner with some bits of paper. And as we came through, she was handing out these bits of paper. And there were invitations to a grand hall. And this is the space that we were in. And we were the characters that existed in this space. And I remember going up to her and I said, who are we supposed to be? And she said, you can be anybody. And that was one of those first moments that I had of, we can be anybody, we can do anything. Isn't this amazing? Isn't this wonderful? And I think that's when my love of theatre, my love of drama kind of begun. And in a strange way, that sort of theatre and that drama is the thing that created the kind of coach that I am today. When I went to drama school, we started to look at plays and stories of all ages. And I got this idea that things were timeless. There wasn't a beginning to a story. They just existed through time immemorial. And that was something that was really wonderful, that we could go back in history and be those characters. And through being those characters, we could learn and explore and discover something. And at school, I loved the exploring and discovering and the playing. When it came to the sitting and the writing, I found that a little bit more challenging. But the doing stuff, I absolutely adored it. And I suppose that became part of who I am as a coach, because I like to play and explore and see what happens, as opposed to just kind of sit and think about it. While I was in that kind of phase between college and drama school, I joined a company called Fusion, and it was a dance drama company. And it's one of the first places where I understood that there was somebody who would hold an idea. And this director that we worked with, a woman called Bayhan, she was a choreographer, and she kind of held the space. But it's before I knew what holding the space was. And she would be very clear about what she wanted us to do and how she wanted us to do it and what her vision was and how she wanted us to move around. But she would hold that space so we could be great. And then we had people like David Glass come in, who's a mime director, and he'd be very performance orientated. You do it like this is the only way. And if you didn't do it his way, then it wasn't right. I suppose that's the performance end of theatre, of coaching. And as some of you will know, that I also trained as a mime artist. And when I did the whole mime stuff, so all the glass box stuff, all of that kind of, all of that, we had to tell stories physically. So there were no words for the story. So you had to have a concept of what that story was and then share it to an audience. And I think that's where my first sort of detective skills around what's a story, what sits in a story, how is a story told. And years later, when I became a coach, these were the things that were really interesting for me. These were the things that were really key for me that I really wanted to find out about. Was, what's going on within your story that enables you to be you. And I think one of the other things about stories that I find so exciting is that's how we create our meaning of the world. I used to work with a company called the London Bowl Theatre Company and an organisation called Make Believe Arts. And we used to go into primary schools and work with children around telling stories and role play. And I used to watch them sort of making meaning of their world through playing out these stories, through acting out being the mum and the dad and the brother and the sister and the boss. That's how they were making meaning of what was going on within their world. And I found all this stuff really interesting and fascinating, but I had no idea about the world of coaching there. This was just theatre for me. But I loved it, and I was excited by it. And so when I found coaching, I found a way to sort of fuse those ideas together. And that's kind of the style that I use today. So I suppose I've told you a bit about why I do what I do. And I think the other reason about why I do what I do is this idea that when I was at school and when I was growing up, I wish that I had a coach that could come and work with me and that could support me through my journey. And so when I trained as a coach, there was this real desire in me to work with as many people as humanly possible. And I guess I'm really lucky being a trainer of coaches because I get to do that. I get to work with loads of people, train them to be coaches, and then they go and work with people outside of that space as well. It kind of ripples through. So that's something that's really exciting for me. So my framework, the sort of the how I do what I do. So there's hearing and naming the story. There's understanding the client's character. There's retelling to uncover the unnoticed. Choosing the rewrite, and creating a positive next chapter. So let's start with hearing and naming the story. So I'm coaching somebody, and they're talking about what's going on, they're exploring their challenge, and how this sits, and how this feels for them. I'm really listening in to well, what's the story that they're telling me here? What's going on within this? And by really listening in, you can start to name the style of the story that they're telling you. Now, sometimes I name this overtly and say, oh, this feels like this kind of a story to me. And other times I'm just kind of thinking about it, just holding it in the back of my head. But I'm trying to understand what's the story that they're sharing. Where does this story come from? Is this a story that everybody's told over time, or is this really unique to them as a person? So we try to hear and name what that story is. Understanding the character that they are playing within this story. So, who are they in this story? Who are they being? Those of you that are familiar with things like the drama triangle, are they being the victim within their story? Are they playing out that victim role? Is that what they're doing and they're not seeing the possibility of change or options in their world, so they're stuck in that victim? Are they playing the persecutor in their story? Are they telling people what to do? Are they the angry person in their story, kind of bossing everybody around and people aren't shifting and moving, so they get caught and locked into something that really just brings out the worst in them? So are they rescuing in that story? Are they trying to save everybody? From time to time, I'm sure we've all been the rescuer in our world. It's really interesting. Actually, today I was doing a supervision call, and some of the coaches on the call were talking about the challenges that had come up for them as coaches as we were doing supervision. And I caught myself in that moment going, yeah, but it's okay. This is early days. And I said to them, oh no, I've just tried to rescue you. I'm there supervising you, and there's me trying to make it okay for you. And we had a bit of a laugh because we could recognise what was going on, but it kind of shows up in all of us all the time, this idea that we try to rescue people, the characters that we try to play. So retelling to uncover the unnoticed. I think this is one of the real key things for me around narrative coaching, story-based coaching, is that often we sort of go through an experience and we've seen it, we've understood it, and we're holding on to it, but we haven't noticed all the parts that exist within that experience. We haven't noticed all the things that have happened, what we've said, our emotions, the other emotions that have been in that room or that space with us. And as we retell that story and repicture that story, we start to notice some of the other things that existed within that story. We start to notice the bits that we didn't know were there. We start to notice our own emotions. We start to notice other people's emotions. We start to remember the location, what we were wearing. And as we tell that story more and more and more, we can build on the unnoticed and bring that to the fore. We can take the story from something that's locked inside of our heads and inside of ourselves, and we can bring it out and have a look at it and go, wow, look, that's what was going on and it sits over there, instead of being locked into the story. Because sometimes when we're telling ourselves these stories and they're just stuck in our heads and they're not vocalised, we create all sorts of stories in there. We kind of twist them and bend them and shape them around. But then when we get the opportunity to actually vocalise those stories and have them reflected back at us, we start to see new meaning in those stories. We start to understand different things that we didn't see before, didn't recognise before. And then we can choose to rewrite these stories. So we have this narrative that's playing out in our head, and we go and we see our coach and we talk about what's going on for us, and we can then go, well, what do we want to happen next? How do we want this story to play out for ourselves? How do we want to rewrite and recreate this story that we have at the moment? And one of the things that I like about this idea of being able to rewrite our stories is this idea that our story isn't fixed. So when we think about fairy tales or stories that we've read, those stories are fixed. It starts like this, the prince comes along, then there's the princess, there's a dragon, and then the story's over. It's very fixed what happens in those stories. But our lives aren't fixed. We can choose to rewrite our stories, we can choose to rewrite our lives. We can decide what it is that we want to do. And so for me, there's this great power in being able to choose to rewrite our narratives. Choose to unpick all the stories that we've been running for a long time and recreate them, see new meaning within these stories. And that, I suppose, leads on to creating the positive next chapter. Because a lot of the time when clients come to work with me, that's part of what they want. They want to create the next bit to be more positive or less stuck than they currently are. So how do we go about creating that positive next step? How do we go about seeing something that enlivens them and creates passion and excitement within them so they can move forward in a great way, as opposed to just staying stuck where they are? And I think part of what that positive next chapter is understanding why they want to continue and what it is that they want. So many of the people that we work with, who's a coach in the room? Who's a coach? Loads of us. Training to be coaches, almost a coach. Lots of us do. Awesome. Okay, so when we're working with our clients and they're stuck, they come to work with us because they want to create something new. And we talk about creating something new that's positive for them. So they're walking towards the negative. They're walking something positive and exciting, something that brings them alive, and finding out what that is, asking the question, what is it you want? I think that's that great question that when our clients come to us and we sit and they go, what do you want? What do you want to get out of coaching? What do you want to get out of your lives? And through retelling these stories and rewriting these stories and exploring the characters that they are in these stories, we can enable them, or I think part of how I work is to enable them to find that new and exciting life that they want to live, and look at how they can go about creating and living that life. Any thoughts or questions so far on whether I'm kind of rattling away at 100 million miles an hour? Yeah.
When you're retelling the story and having stories reflect back at us, will the influence of people who are external to you influence your own story in terms of gearing it to the wrong direction?
Do the people that are external to us influence our stories and gear it to the wrong direction?
Because you're retelling it to them and you're discovering it again through them.
Well, I suppose when I'm talking about retelling the story, it's about with your coach.
Oh, gotcha, sorry.
So you're sharing the story with your coach, and through the sharing of that story, the retelling of that story, the coach helps you to see that story in a different way now.
So it's a different way of like you writing the story down and reading it to yourself.
Yeah. So when we, if we capture our story in words, we write it down, and we look at it and go, oh, is that really what I'm thinking? A bit like when we journal. We kind of reread our journals and go, oh, that's what I was thinking on that day. That wasn't exactly how it played out. We can re-look at our journals or rewrite our journals. Nick, you were about to...
Well, I'm building on the question at the front, which was a great question, which is what's the nature of the audience that this story is being told to, and who are we as an audience?
Yeah.
Being a coach? And I think like practitioner to notice what audience are we creating for the client
Absolutely.
story.
Absolutely. So as the coach, what's going on for us and what does that story bring up for us? So when we hear our clients' stories, sometimes they create a vibration in us or an energy in us, a story that reminds us of a good time or a bad time. So how do we respond? Sometimes we get pulled into the story, and before we know it, we're not the coach anymore, but we're their mate, having a laugh and a chat about that story. So how can we step back from the story and be an observer of the story? So without getting sucked into the story itself, but observe the story that's being told. So that we can ask questions that can also allow the client to observe that story and reflect back on that story. Yeah.
There's something about story to me which is unreal. So would you say there's something about a shift to the unreal to real in terms of creating the next chapter and not maybe trying to not keep the client within a story that maybe isn't helpful?
So we were having this chat this morning about this idea of real and unreal, what's not real, and it's all part of our perception anyway. And I think part of what I think about when I'm coaching with somebody is, well, what do you want it to be? And how do you want to feel about it? And how do you want to reflect on it? Because whatever that is that you create is for you. And you will perceive it as real as you exist and live within it, whether others perceive it as real or not. And that story is just something that we're telling ourselves. And it's just helping us to create meaning within the world that we live in. Yeah.
Can I put something forward about that?
Go for it.
I believe that what is real here is that only love is real. And in every single fairy tale, the prince kisses the princess or whatever, and they wake up, and love is a notion that heals them and moves them forward. So we see all fairy tales coming to this notion of love healing everything. Now, if you move your life in direction, what is love? What is everything that represents kindness, compassion, grace, harmony, cooperation, reverence for life? Everything comes alive with meaning and purpose. So it's such a great way to move your story into the next chapter of your life.
Now what's interesting is, because yes, it moves towards love, but what's interesting is fairy tales, it's like, so you've got to be the guy who's like big and strong, and you've got an axe, and you've got to have a horse. If you don't have an axe and a horse, you're not the guy. If you can't come charging in, so who are you if you're not that guy? How many of the women in the room just want to be the princess that lies there asleep, waiting for someone to come along and kiss them and wake them up? I mean, some of you, the idea of a man coming along to kiss you, wake you up, it's like, oh my God, no! So, yes, there is this thing about love, but I sort of go, sometimes those fairy tales, those stories, they lock us into a belief structure, they lock us into a system that we try to live out. One of the conversations that we were having the other day with Sarah on one of the blabs that we did was this idea of, if you're not the strong guy, if you're not the prince, how do you show up in the world? Do you have to create conflict in your world so you can demonstrate to everybody else that you are the strong guy? Is that what needs to happen? Sorry? Yes. So that the modern woman, things are shifting and changing. Women taking over for themselves. Or taking care for themselves, absolutely. But even in that, there are some women who go, well, I don't want to take care of myself. I want to be taken care of sometimes. So these stories that are given to us through our childhood, they create the sort of the world that we try to live through or live by. And as we get older and we're trying to live those lives, we get stuck and we get confused and we get locked into something. And I think that's where coaching comes along and helps us to go, well, what is that story you're trying to live by? And what's the story that you want to create and what you want to live by? And how do you move that forward? Any other thoughts or questions?
With the stories, there's one, that notion of you have this Prince Charming, so only one person you love. And that's the ego's trick in towards us not finding our true reflection and the best relationships. Because we think it has to be this knight in shining armor.
Yeah.
He needs to look incredible, he needs to have this degree, and these are all the things that are so external.
Yeah. But that's what we're looking for. We're looking for this external world to validate something. We go, when that person meets this list, then they can be the person that we fall in love with. And then we fall in love with them because they meet the list, and then we live with them, and then we go, oh, you met the list on the outside, but what about all the other lists that are inside? We haven't thought about, because those stories didn't teach us to think about those things. So, in most stories, in most narratives, we have a beginning, we have a middle, and we have an end. And for me, I think that coaches work in the middle. That's where we are. I think that beginning stuff is where we've been growing up, we've been generating our beliefs, our history, our experiences, all of that stuff's been happening. And then the coach arrives in the middle of the story. And in the middle of the story, the heart of the story, is where we create change, is where we allow our clients to know that things aren't fixed. And through that, they go off to create their own end. And with a lot of the clients that we work with as coaches, we don't get to the end point with them. We kind of set them off on their journey, and then they go off and they do it. And sometimes we hear back a year later, hey, I'm doing that thing that I said I was going to do. Or 5 years later, or sometimes we never hear at all. But for me as a coach, we live in that middle bit with our clients. We arrive when the story's already begun. So one of the things that we have to do is be adaptable to recognizing that we're not the beginning of the story. We might be a new chapter within their story, but their story already exists. And we're helping them to rewrite it, redesign it, change it, adapt it, so they can go off and live the rest of their story. So, I've got a question for you. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to chat to the person beside you, and I want you to talk about what's your most favourite story and what's your least favourite story. Okay, what's your most favourite story and what's your least favourite story? I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds to have this chat, maybe a minute max.
Fictional?
Anything. Fictional, non-fictional, just something that when you go, oh, that's a great story, I love that story, or something you go, I ate that story. Just think of what's your most favourite story and your least favourite story. I'm just going to give you a minute, and your minute begins now. Off you go. So, let's start with our least favourite story. Let's start with that. So who's got a least favourite? Law, go for it.
Snow White.
Snow White. Why is it your least favourite story?
It's completely useless.
She's completely useless. Okay, so she's completely useless. I wonder what goes on for a client when they hate that Snow White story and they go, that woman is completely useless. How does that reverberate in the rest of their world? How does that reverberate in how they treat women or treat themselves? Cool, lovely. Another least favourite. Yeah.
We agreed things like saw and hostage.
Saw and hostage. The trees of eyes.
For me, it's quite blocky. As we travel, I don't know, I get lost down in the country.
So these stories that tell us that when we're alone at night in a dark alley or on the motorway, something bad is going to happen. And so we go up, we travel through our world going, when's the bad stuff going to happen? Waiting for the bad bit. You're walking along going, the stories have told me that this is where the bad bit happens. My phone rings and I'm alone in the house. That's where the bad bit happens. So we're running this idea. Let's have another. There was a hand here. Yeah.
Anything to do with these calendars.
So tell me a bit more about that.
Oh, they just go round in circles and make silly choices.
Yeah. So this idea that things just going round and round and round and making silly choices and not actually looking at what's going on within that world. Yeah. Yeah.
I hate stories of big charities or big organizations that are supposed to be helping people, and on the face of it they're doing great work, but actually on the inside and actually in reality they're not. They're doing the opposite, and that's really frustrating.
So these stories where these organisations go, we're helping you to help them to help us. And then when you look underneath that, actually it's just somebody helping
And they're
themselves.
just faking numbers and
Yeah.
data and
Yeah. And there's that kind of, there is a falseness to the story. We're looking at it again, this isn't real. There's something going on here. And that can annoy us, and it kind of plays on our sense of fairness, where we want things to be fair, we want things to work out. but they're not working out because somebody has the keys or the purse strings. Lovely. Yeah.
And I have to wait for Mr. Prince.
Yes.
And have to wait to be rescued and
Yeah.
happen to see.
Ah, yeah. So no thinking and just wait for the prince to come along, save you, and everything will be fine at that point when that thing happens. So we become dormant. We're just sitting there waiting. And I think sometimes what happens is we rebel against these stories that we don't like. We rebel against the values that sit within those stories. And so we're pushing against them. And as we're pushing against them, we're moving into a different space. But we're not looking at what might be used in those stories. We're just trying to ignore them and block them out. And sometimes by doing that, we lose some sense of balance. There was another hand over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that, saying friends that feel they have to stay with their prince because they're reaching an age where they have to have children and therefore have to stay in that relationship.
Yeah. Yes, this idea of a story that allows you to stay stuck and that doesn't give you the option for choice and to move forward. Okay, so what are the stories then that we love? What are our favourite stories? Yeah, go for it.
Inspiring stories. So Oprah grew up in a town in Casiego, Mississippi in 1954 where the lynchings of black men were counted in history. And her mother's greatest desire for her and her grandmother's greatest desire for her to be a maid. That's all she had, the vision and possibly and hope, and she grew into Oprah. For me, that's my favourite ever that I've ever listened to.
Where somebody goes beyond what was meant for them, or what somebody was trying to hold them back to, and they grow beyond that thing, yeah.
We both had the same, and that was Shawshank Redemption, which is pretty much the same. You kind of overcome all your challenges, and you know, somehow you just don't give up, and you just, you know.
It's that perseverance, that keep on going, making something happen.
Peter Pan is a great one.
Tell me about Peter Pan.
I think for me it's feeling like it's going out and keeping the imagination, and there's no boundaries.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of community, it's got multifaceted, it's fun.
Yeah, so it's fun, there's community, there's flying, there's magic, it's, yeah, lovely, yeah.
Stories of people who were in love and couldn't be together, and after many years of doing stuff and developing themselves, they came together again.
Yeah. Love conquering all, there's people not being able to be together and going off on these different journeys, having these adventures, but somehow finding a way to come back together. Now I love all those stories too, but there's something really interesting that I find about those stories, is that sometimes we try to live our lives by those stories. Those stories that we like, those stories that we love, we go, well, love will conquer all. So if I just keep working and working and working, eventually it will find its way back. And sometimes it doesn't find its way back. And how do we feel when that happens? Or when we think, oh, there's love and there's magic and we can fly out the window. What happens when we get to the edge of the window ledge and we kind of go, maybe I can't quite fly yet. And that idea that we try to live up to something that isn't necessarily real for us in that moment. I think that also kind of messes up this sense of balance within the stories that we've heard and we've grown up and we've loved and we hold dear to ourselves. Because we can't always live them out. We can't always exist within those stories. So we have this sense of disappointment or failure because that's what we want. We've seen that others can do it. We're trying to do it. It's not working out for us. So we have this sense of failure because we're trying to live up to somebody else's story, to somebody else's dream. I think one of the things that we do as coaches is we go, yeah, but what's your story? How do we create your story? Not somebody else's story, but your story. So you can live up to what you want, not what somebody else wants. So when I say that, I mean, what does that make you think or wonder?
Does it not, yeah, for me, does it not limit them? If they've got a limited story running them, surely as a coach, it's our job, hopefully, to reframe it or have them able to reframe it if they want to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have to want to change.
They have to want to change, yeah. And sometimes, we can look at them with that story and we can help them make that shift and we can help them make those changes. Yeah. So, when we think about the stories that people are living and that they're existing within, when our clients come to us and we're looking out for the stories, here are some sort of, I suppose, guidelines or some archetypes of stories and ways of being that we can listen out for to see, is this the story that they're telling us? Is this what they're presenting us? So we've got overcoming the monster. The terrible thing that's going on in our lives, and they're battling to overcome it so they can live that happily ever after. rags to riches. I'm going to build myself up. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to earn $1 million. I was going to say dollars. I don't know why I was going to say dollars. I'm American. But I'm going to earn $1 million. The quest. I'm going to get my magic staff. I'm going to get my group, and we're going to go off into the world, and we're going to find that pot of gold. We've got the voyage and the return. I'm going to leave this space. I'm going to go on a journey, and I'm going to learn something and understand something. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to share it with the world around me. We've got the comedy. My life is just a comedy. Everything goes wrong. I'm constantly tripping over. What can go wrong will go wrong. The tragedy. Well, it's just sad and bad and unhappy. Everything I touch falls apart. My businesses fail. My relationships end in doom and gloom, and nobody wants to talk to me. Or the rebirth, the idea where you rebirth yourself, where you kind of go, I don't want to be this anymore. I'm going to be something else. I'm going to reclaim my identity. So when you think about those possible plots, which one jumps out for you as playing a part in your life? Don't be shy now. Yeah. Overcoming the monster and rebirth. Tell me a little bit about overcoming the monster.
Not particularly monster,
Difficulties. Yeah. I suppose the monster's the metaphor for the difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay, so overcoming those difficulties. There's a hand. Yeah.
Yeah, voyage and return for me. I think every time I'm faced with some sort of challenge, or naturally or instinctively or whatever it is, I kind of want to go somewhere and reflect and then come back.
Yeah.
And it's usually somewhere else, like a foreign country or something along those lines. But I literally, that's like my go-to, my coping mechanism, if you will.
Cool. So that desire to go, oh, this is hard. I can't think here in this space. Let me go to another space, perhaps where it's warm and there's a beach and there's some tequila, and then I can rethink and then come back and re-look at the world and see it through different eyes, or re-look at my challenge and see it through different eyes. Anybody else? Still a couple more. Yeah.
I think maybe it was tragedy and then the river.
Okay.
And I've been working for 5 years in the fashion luxury industry, and it broke me down. Like I have a chronic condition now. And from that chronic health condition, I realized that it's my time to wake up other people that it's in my industry, to like maybe help them get out or be more conscious about the way they manage their career. And that is just my rebirth. I've been recovering for a year, and now I want to learn this so that I can help people in the industry I was, just not to collapse like I did, because it was quite fatal. So yeah, I think this is my rebirth, like just learn how to help others to like not fall into the pit that I did.
Cool. And I think there's something that, I think a lot of coaches do that rebirth thing. I think a lot of coaches have a challenge that existed in their life, and once they've overcome that challenge, they go, wait a minute, if I can do this and find a way through it, perhaps I can help others find their way through it and overcome that challenge for themselves. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Comedy, I think you need to lighten up and laugh. That's the seriousness. When you're in it, it's quite difficult, but there's more things happen over the years, and I do kind of email updates and turn it into a story.
Yeah.
So it's been able to take light of some of the stuff that happens, which is quite healing.
Yeah. It's quite interesting when we look at sort of some of the early comedies, that kind of slapstick stuff. It's quite tragic, some of the situations they were in, but they were able to find a lightness with it, and that brought a humour to that world. So the characters. What are the characters that we are playing within these stories? How can we notice what's going on? So these are some of the archetypal characters here. So we've got the sovereign, the king or queen that wants goodness for everybody. We've got the warrior, that person that takes action and battles through and makes shit happen. We've got the sage, the thinker, the contemplator, the planner. We've got the lover who wants to make connections with people, be around people, make people's lives happy. We've got the mystic, the knower of the unknown, the seer of things that people can't quite comprehend. Then we've got the jester, the player, the fool, the living in the moment, full of excitement. Now, these characters have their great sides to them, their great parts, but they also have their shadow sides. So we have the sovereign who wants goodness for everybody around them, but sometimes that goodness means they don't do anything for themselves. So they're constantly putting out for everybody else and working so everybody else can have a great time, but what about them? We've got that warrior who's taking action and making stuff happen, but not thinking about the consequences of what's happening. Not stopping to take a moment to go, well, where's this action going to lead me? We've got the sage who's doing all this wonderful thinking, but not in connection with themselves or the people around them. We've got the lover who's wanting to make connections, but not connecting really for themselves. We've got the mystic who's caught up in that woo-woo space, that kind of, yeah, it will happen, we just need to will it, and it's going to appear, but not having that grounding in a reality. And then we've got the jester, the fool, where everything's for this moment, but nothing else exists. Yeah.
I think there's the misunderstood villain as well, isn't there? It's the misunderstood villain.
Yeah.
There's so many characters, the villain is in so many stories, but actually it's your perception of what that villain is doing, whereas if you unearth that story, the villain can actually be the warrior or the sovereign.
Yeah, so what's the intention behind what they're doing? But where do we notice ourselves within these characters? Do you notice yourself within these characters? Yeah, because I do. I see me. I see Mr. Jester that wants to have fun and play and be in that moment and not plan for tomorrow. And then tomorrow rocks up and I go, oh no, what am I doing now? I see that happening in my life. Where else do you see it happening? Well, let's have a few. Do you see themselves? Yeah, go
I'm definitely a lover. I try to have compassion as my daily meals.
Compassion is your daily meals.
Yes.
And so that's a great thing, right? What's the shadow side of that for you?
It's, I think with the ego, it could teach you that you're never enough.
Okay.
And that you need love from other people.
Yeah.
I think I've seen this in a lot of examples.
Yeah.
Where you think you need love from other people because you are not in all with yourself.
Okay. So it's all about the others,
Yes.
and then wanting the reflection from them to feel good about yourself.
Mm.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Other characters that we notice within ourselves.
I once did an online archetypes test with then a couple more, and there was one, the creator.
Okay.
I was that one.
You were the
and a bit
creator.
of the jester and
Yeah.
a bit of, yeah.
Okay. And what was it that the creator did?
Creating things, well, obviously, but there's not much more to say. So creating the world around
Creating
you,
the world around
creating new things,
And one of the things that jumps into the mind for me is if we're somebody who's always creating new things, do we sit and enjoy the things that we have? Or does that not happen for us? We've got to move on to the next thing, I can be a bit like that with gadgets and toys and shiny things. I want the next one and the next one. Yeah.
Just a question, because I realized that all those characters are quite positive and great. But what about monsters, victims?
they all have a shadow side as well.
I think they all have shadow sides, yeah. So I think that the warrior can be the monster. The person that's just taking action and kicking doors down. When if you're on the other side of that can be the monster for you. Likewise, the person who's just caught in their head and they're just doing all the thinking, but there's no emotional connection. If you're in a relationship with somebody like that, that's going to be horrible for you. Or if you're the lover and you're seeking to connect, but they're in their head, how's that going to be for you? Perhaps for you, that's where that monster lives. So all of these characters, they have their positives, but they also have that shadow side, that dark side. I think when I'm working with my clients, what I'm trying to explore is, well, which character are they playing? Or rather, which character is showing up in them as they tell me about their challenge and what's going on for them? And how, as I think about that character, how can I notice the shadow side and the plus side? And how can I bring that to their awareness as well? There's a book called Team Me, And it talks about this idea that we have all of these characteristics within us, and what we need to do is try and pull those different characteristics out so we have a rounded self. So we can decide at what point do we need to be the warrior or the lover or the mystic. So whatever challenge that we're facing, which part of ourselves do we bring to that challenge or to that situation? And when one is dominant over all the others, and that's the one that's always showing up, how that can cause conflict within our lives.
Or also, you can also, not necessarily cause conflict, but when you understand somebody's archetypal qualities, you can almost be with it a bit more because you know that that's where they're coming from. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you can understand who they are and the intention or what sits behind the actions that they're taking by recognising where they sit within this. Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess as I watch this, I'm struggling a bit because it seems kind of reductionist, and you know, there's a black and a white, and putting people into types, and you know, I'm struggling to see how that's.
Which can be different archetypes or characters in different situations in life. You know,
But that's fine. I guess it's kind of almost like a so what, like. It seems more about kind of the process happening within them, you know, versus just all the content.
Yeah, so I suppose when I think about when I'm coaching somebody and I'm noticing these characters coming out within them, if I can reflect that back to them so they can have an understanding of that's how they're being, then it gives them a choice. Because sometimes they don't recognise that that's the character that they're playing out. And when they can start to go, oh, actually, yeah, I am being a bit like this. So I can be, there are other ways that I can be. But yeah, I hear what you're saying about it. It could feel very reductionist of saying you're either this, or this. And that's not what I'm trying to say. I think we're a mixture of all of these things. And I think that the different challenges that we have and different situations that we have bring out different parts of us.
So I guess that's quite true of the stories that you play, that you try and get your clients to think about the different stories and maybe when those stories are right or working for them or not working.
Yeah, so you're ahead of the game. Yes. So let's just think about where these stories might happen. So is this a story that exists within the home environment? Is that the location for the story? Is it about work for the story? Is it about friends and relationships that's happening? Is it about families? So we all recognise that sometimes we have a challenge that only kind of shows up when we're with our friends. That's when it kicks off. Or when we're with our families at Christmas time. That's when all those emotions and that energy comes together and creates something. So those stories aren't playing out all of the time. There are moments or places that set off those stories for us. Perhaps in our relationships, or perhaps with our community, where our community wants to do something and we want to do something different. And so there's a clash of ideas that exist within that. So when I'm working with my clients, I'm thinking, where's this story happening for you? Where is it taking place? And where is it okay? Where is that same challenge you have, but in a different location? How is that okay there? So we can start to think about, well, what is the location and what might that location be creating or stimulating that's giving you that challenge? So we think about the styles of the story that somebody might be living. So here we go. Is it an action story? So when you're telling your stories and you're thinking about your life, is your life full of action and adventure and fast cars and fine dining? Is it an adventure? You're traveling from place to place and things amazingly happening for you. Is it a comedy? Is it lots of fun and excitement? Or is it a fantasy? Are you making it up as you go along? Are you going to Comic-Con dressed as Chewbacca? Is it a horror for you? Is it like full of angst and terror? Is it a mystery? Do you not know what's going on in your life? Unable to work out how these things are unfolding and trying to think, so what does this mean for me? Is it a romance? Is it you're just having this wonderful romantic time that's existing? Is that the style of your story that's playing out for you? Or is it a thriller? Is it a dark and a deep and scary place for you to be? And when clients are talking about what's going on for them, perhaps the emotion of what's going on for them shows up in these places. The emotion that they exhibit as they're sharing their story and their ideas starts to come to the surface. We can start to notice, how are they feeling about their story? Do they feel this is a flight of fantasy, or they're in terror around this challenge that they have? And how is that impacting the choices that they can and they can't make?